Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Learn with Jason. Today on the show, we are going to be learning about something super practical. In working at bigger companies, I've always found that one of the things that I trip up on is my ability to quickly build out new prototypes because I always find myself just having a little bit too much fun with the CSS. If you've watched the show before, you know that that's my favorite rabbit hole to fall down is writing a bunch of CSS. And while I do enjoy it, it's also not the most productive use of my time in a lot of cases. And so we're going to be talking today about how we can solve that problem and make it so that we can be really productive without having to get deep into the technical weeds on making it look right. And to help us with that is our resident expert, Mike Aparicio. Mike, how you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Jason.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. I am very excited to be learning from you because you are somewhat of I think kind of a unicorn out there in that you are a principal engineer in HTML and CSS.
Yes. Yeah, unicorn in that I only have one skill. You don't want me writing production JavaScript, that's for sure. But
Well,
yeah,
but I think you're in a role that I think a lot of people would love to have, which is,
yes,
a lot of people really enjoy writing HTML and CSS and they'll dabble a little bit in JavaScript, but ultimately the joy of putting together a great looking UI is that's a desirable job, but it
yeah.
feels like those are becoming fewer and further between. So do you like how many other people do you know who have your job title?
Literally none. And if there are, I'd love to meet them. But I've seen a lot of friends recently lament that, they love writing CSS, but they have to write React and, other stuff that they don't enjoy. And like, why can't I just write CSS?
Hmm.
And I'm now at my third role at a big company doing this, and uh, I've gotten my last two jobs from people who knew me from Groupon, where I was there for 8 years, and they were just like, Mike, we need you here. Please come work here. So I haven't applied for a job in like 12 years. Well,
That
that's not true. I've applied to a couple jobs, but they don't really get what I do, right? Like unless you've worked with me and you know what it's like to not ever have to write CSS, then you don't what am I going to hire a guy for that much money that only writes CSS, right?
you know, it, this is not what we're talking about today. So I'm going to try not to get too far off on this tangent. But you just said something that I think is so important. You have a skill set that would be very hard to get hired for in a traditional way,
It's
like
true.
through an application process. And I think I do as well. I don't think I could go to a company and say, you need to pay me as much as I get paid to make videos for your company. Um, but through I would say, application of network and working in public,
Hmm.
both of us have been able to leverage our way into non-traditional careers at a rate that is, that sustains us. Um, that's just a little take home for everybody at home. Like if you want a weird job, you can't go in through the front door. You gotta find another way in, and it's going to
It's
be
true.
through that working in public. It's going to be through the network. Like what other things have you done that you think have helped you kind of get this career for yourself?
Second City. I did the improv conservatory and writing program at Second City. That's really
Okay.
helped my career quite a bit because there's a lot of engineers who can do any idiot can do what I do. Like I went to school for sports journalism, so I don't have a computer science degree. Um, it's not rocket science what we're doing. Um, but being able to communicate ideas between design, engineering, and product is has been super valuable.
Yeah, and so Second City being a like improv comedy troupe, you're saying that it's not necessarily the comedy, it's the communication skills.
Yes, and collaboration skills, right? Like
Hmm.
the spirit of yes and rather than like no but, right? And just being to take what people are giving you and grow it,
I love
like
this so
no matter
much.
what it is.
This lines up with I talk about this all the time on the stream, usually when I'm on my solo streams and just ranting about whatever's on my mind.
Mm-hmm.
This idea that when you learn a skill, the surface value of the skill might not seem that high. Like learning improv comedy, if you look at it in the technical professional context, you might go, well, that has zero application. But the other skills that you learn as part of learning that skill have full overlap into this completely seemingly unrelated career.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely fascinating.
I would also say once you've failed on the main stage at Second City, like everything else is easy. Like when you bomb on the same stage that Chris Farley performed on, it's like being on your show is super easy.
Right, exactly. Yeah, when I was in a touring band, we would do so much where we would play to an empty room and like one person would maybe be watching, but most of the people there were like, "Man, we just wanted to come to this bar. We didn't know that you were going to be here making noise. Like, why? When are you done? Can we be done?"
Yeah, I've been in those shows, but for improv.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Oh,
So
what is this? I just want to
I
drink my
think
beer.
so. Okay, so you've already given us a little bit of background, but for folks who are maybe meeting you for the first time, do you want to give us a bit more of your kind of context backstory?
Sure. Yeah. So, I started out my career as kind of just a webmaster, right? Like back in the day. I started making websites before CSS was even a thing. And so I spent many years kind of toiling away as a webmaster, right? I don't even know if those exist anymore. But in 2011, I started at Groupon, and I was hired by design as a UI engineer to work on this
Okay.
redesign project. And it went for like a year and just never saw the light of day. And so I was really frustrated. I was getting ready to quit, and an opportunity came up on internal tools team to be their kind of front end person. They had two designers supporting a half a dozen engineering teams, and they're like, how do we take the work of these two designers and scale it across these 6 teams and make it look similar? So that was right around the time Twitter Bootstrap came out, and we're like,
Okay.
oh, should we use Twitter Bootstrap? And we thought about it, and we're like, well, we'd probably have to make a lot of customizations. We'd be writing a lot of styles on top of Bootstrap. And then I was like, why don't we just make our own Bootstrap? And this is kind of inspired by Dave Rupert. He had written a blog post that said, essentially, tiny bootstraps for every client, right? And so that was like, yeah, why can't we just do this? So it's kind of what I did, and that kind of transitioned into design systems, like being able to support our iOS and Android teams and what they were doing, because the CSS doesn't really help with that. But I really just kind of doubled down on my CSS skills, and as I built these frameworks, I built 3 of them at Groupon for different verticals. I found people had to write less and less CSS, and then so from there, I worked at a startup called Provi, which is like an alcohol B2B. Under one of my former managers, he was like, "Hey, Mike, we need a design system." I was like, "Great." This was right when the pandemic started, and Groupon's business model relied on people leaving the house. So I was like, "Yeah,
Right.
sure, I'm in." And it turns out, pandemic did not stop people from drinking, so that was a pretty good move. And then I had another colleague reach out to me and say, "Hey, Mike, do you know anybody who does what you do?" And I said, "Yeah, me." And so I started at Turquoise Health about a year and a half ago. And Turquoise is a startup focused on price transparency in healthcare. And so I developed our design system there, which is called Pit Viper. This is the logo.
Nice.
And yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. And so kind of our motto with Pit Viper is like, we write CSS so you don't have to. So the devs come in and they're not used to like not having to write CSS. And we had talked before about like the value of what I do, right? The way I kind of pitch people on it. Not that I really have to pitch people on it once they work with me, but let's say, how much time, Jason, would you say you spend working on CSS? Like back when you were in an actual, developer role? Like maybe 10%.
Back when you had a real job.
Yeah, that's right. Well, when you had to write code, right? Like
Yeah,
probably
no.
now it's like,
I think I would spend a decent amount of time in the CSS. Yeah, maybe 10, 15%. I mean,
Yes.
if I had my way, it would be like 75%, but that probably wasn't productive.
So let's say like the average engineer spends 10% of their time writing CSS.
Hmm.
And let's say conservatively they're making 100,000 a year. So that's like 10 grand for every developer that's not writing CSS. So the bigger your company gets, the more valuable it becomes, right? And it's funny that my last two roles have been at startups where we started out, we had like one designer and maybe 10 engineers. But it's even more valuable there because it's even more valuable there because as you bring people on board, you're kind of showing them this way of doing things that makes everything so much easier. And we'll get into that once we start, like what makes this so powerful. It's not just the CSS, it's like what we can do with it and how we can get developers from translating pictures of websites into just like wiring up front end code.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. I mean, I think yes, I think I have spent, and I think what makes it valuable to me is when I take it outside of myself, right? Because when I start thinking about like, if I think about CSS, I'm like, but I want to write CSS. It's fun for me. But then if I start thinking about working on it on a team, it's not fun anymore because now you have the problem where everybody does it a little bit differently.
Yes.
You don't have the consistency of like, well, I write it like this. So you
Right.
start going in for conventions because there's not the equivalent of a TypeScript for CSS yet. So you end up with like, now you're enforcing BEM or you're enforcing, like some kind of strict rule for CSS. And a lot of the people don't enjoy it, so they're just kind of like slamming whatever they need to at the end of the file to like append something to solve the problem they have, so they can get back to the thing they're interested in. And all of a sudden, now you're not like doing fun CSS. You're doing like defensive CSS. You're doing
Yes.
like palliative CSS.
Yes.
And so
Exactly.
and that's where I think these really start to shine is that you're not just solving like devs don't want to write CSS, because some of us do. What you're solving is every dev will probably approach CSS a little bit differently, and you can either solve that problem through convention, which takes a lot of enforcement, training, revisiting, code reviews, et cetera, or you can solve it through like removing it as a bottleneck.
Yep.
And so I think that on balance, if you have any stable product, it's not really a question. You want to remove the bottleneck. You want it to be something where like the devs just get it done the right way without having to think about it or care about it.
Yep.
So yeah, I think that's a very, very like there is a clear use case here. So I guess what I'm trying to think how to like segue, and I don't have a good strategy, so I'm just gonna slam us into it.
So let's say you hired me, right? It's
All
my
right.
first week at LWJ Industries. Like, why don't we take a look at like what that would look like, right?
Okay, I can do it in the most like true way possible because we're literally in the middle of this right now. Let me take us over here, and I'm gonna do a couple things before I start talking about this. Put this banner up. We have this episode, like every episode, is being live captioned. We've got Amanda here with us from White Coat Captioning. You can find those captions at the link at the bottom of the chat. Let me actually put that up because it's kind of hard to. There it is. Can be a little challenging to type that from memory. So y'all can go check this out. Go there. And that is being made possible through the support of our sponsor. We've got Netlify. NX is still talking to them. Hopefully they come back, but Netlify is currently the active sponsor. So thank you very much for making the show more accessible to more people. With that, all right. So Mike, you've started. Here's what happens on your first day. Is I'm going to show you this Figma file.
Great.
And so the next iteration of Learn with Jason is that I have more than just this show now. I have multiple series, And I need a better way of showing those series, because right now, if you ask me about my For Web Devs challenge, which I have actually renamed, and there will be news on that soon, or my Web Lunch series, or any of these other things, I can only point you to a YouTube playlist. I don't have a home for it anywhere.
Right.
So that's what I want to correct. So we are pivoting toward this sort of Netflix, Hulu, like general streaming TV style layout that has the series and then the episodes of the series here, and it's broken up into seasons so that you can, switch between like years and stuff like that, and more details like who's in the series and credits, supporters, things like that. So all of that then points to we got to make it a thing. Right. And
Yep.
so I've been working on this. I've been trying to get the database to work. I've been trying to get the kind of core functionality running, and I'm pretty happy with how that's coming together. But I've definitely just been like YOLOing the styles because it's fun for me. But I also can't ask anybody for help because it's all done the way that I do it.
Yeah.
So my first task for you, if you join the company, would be make this scale.
Yep. Great. Let's do it. So the first thing I would say is that, the way a lot of people approach design systems is they come in and they're like, okay, we need buttons, we need this, we need that, right? And then they tell the engineering team, hey, we need to get this design system work on the roadmap, and they've already got the roadmap, 6 months to a year out, and it's full. You're not getting anything on the roadmap. So my approach has been to take the first thing that's coming up on the roadmap, which in this case is, let's say, this page, and then make that the system, right? So everything that I need to make this page is what goes in the system, and only what I need to make this page goes in the system, right? And so we've got some type styles, some avatars, we've got some like nav elements, some buttons, right? So we build all that stuff, and then when we get to feature 2, which might be like another show, another section, like maybe a video details page or something like that. Maybe that has some new elements that we don't have in the system, but we've got enough in the system from what's here to get us like 90%, set 60, 70% of the way there. And so each successive feature gets faster and faster to build because you're writing less stuff to support it. And so now, having been at Turquoise for almost a year and a half now, like I'm rarely writing things. It's mostly supporting engineers in implementing it. And so, I probably spend less than an hour a week writing CSS, maybe less.
Nice.
So yeah, the first thing I would do is kind of come in and do like a visual style audit, right? So that means looking at your Figma, looking at the website, and looking at all of the values that we're using, right? All of the type sizes, font families, font weights, colors, icons, spacing values, and just kind of like writing all that stuff down, and then trying to whittle it down into like a narrower set of values, so that those are the values in our system, right, that we're using. And then from there we can start like working on stuff.
Got it. Okay. So we're going to do a little bit of movie magic here where, we have the first step here, and then we're going to just pull the pre-made turkey out of the oven, because you asked me for this file about a week ago. And then you sent me, well, first, hold on. Let me send people to some of your stuff here. So this is Mike's website. You should go and check that out. Right, so there's that, and then we've got some comments from the chat. Yes, absolutely. And also, if you want to follow Mike on Mastodon, that's where the action is. So get on there, and let's get that shown. And then you sent me this. Okay, so talk to me about what this is. So you've done your visual audit. You've kind of moved on to the next step.
Yep.
And
so this is the documentation site for our design system. So this is using 11D, and we're basically just like documenting all of the stuff we're building as we go, so that developers know like A, what's in the system, and B, like how do I use this, right? And kind of the benefit of having CSS being the cornerstone of your design system is that it doesn't matter what front end language you use, right? So at
Mhm.
Turquoise, we have people using, Django, they're using Vue, you've got some people that want to use React. And like for me, like it doesn't even matter. It's like, okay, great, use all those things. I don't care. Because we're not writing styles in any of those languages. They're just using class names from our CSS framework.
Oh, that didn't do what I wanted. Thought there was a way to get this to show. So yeah, so we're just using class names. We're just using pre-made components and stuff
Yeah,
and things.
you could maybe zoom in a little bit. It is the site is responsive, so it'll switch around to there you go.
How about that? That's everybody can see.
So if you look at the visual style section, those are all the kind of the things that I'm looking at when I'm coming up with a plan, right? So this is kind of what I derived from the Figma and also from the existing website, and just kind of pulling values. The big thing with colors is like making sure that they're accessible, and you did a great job of like already doing that for the most part. There was only like the purple for like links on the dark backgrounds. We had to use a different purple for that. But aside from that, like all the stuff was accessible, and uh, so that's kind of the big thing. One of the great things about using CSS2 for design systems is you can kind of bake in a lot of those accessibility concerns into the system so that the developers don't even have to think about it.
Awesome. Okay. So, and this is great too because then this means that I've got my colors and notes about where to use it.
Right. That's the big thing. I see a lot of people that just, have some automated process that takes all their tokens and turns it into utility classes. And it's like, slow down. Like we're not using yellow for text. We're not using, we're not using all these colors in every context. We're using specific colors in specific contexts. And we
Hmm.
want to limit how developers are using the colors, even though these are all available in the design system.
Nice. Okay. Cool. And then let's see. So we get into spacing.
Yep. So spacing, like I noticed for the most part, you're using like, multiples of 5. I tend to go with multiples of 4, but one of the things that I learned in all of my many years of design systeming is there's so many hills you can die on, right? It's best to just like rather than try to impose my beliefs about how things should be. I'm just curating the way things are done already and distilling it into a more repeatable thing, right? So if we want to use, 5 pixel increments, great, we can do that. As long as that's what we're doing and we're not doing like, eyeballing it and doing like 9 pixels every now and then. Let's just like pick a set of values and be consistent with it. That's the big thing.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Yeah. And so did you pull these out of my file
Yep.
here?
Yep, there were a few, instances where like stuff was a little bit bigger, a little bit smaller, but I
I
kind of
was,
rounded it off.
I mean, I
Just
was
so,
definitely vibing in that Figma file. So I
yeah,
was going to
and
say, I'm
that
going to be
that
blown
happens.
away.
Yeah, no, that happens, and certainly like I once tweeted that like that if you give a developer a Figma file that says like 15 pixels instead of 16 pixels, they'll put 15 pixels because that's the design, And a bunch of people were like, no, they wouldn't. They would look at the thing, and then a bunch of other people were like, no, yeah, I would just do the 15 pixels because I think Figma is like one of the best and worst things that's ever happened to web development. Like
Hmm.
best in the sense is that it's like as close as you can come to a website without actually making a website. But that's also the worst thing, right? And the developer tools, especially, like it's great that you have all of that. You can click on a layer and it gives you all of those styles. But the bad thing is a lot of times developers will just copy those in, and
Right.
maybe you're inheriting styles from somewhere else already. You don't need to declare what the font color is, and you don't need to declare the font family. So in
Hmm.
our existing CSS at Turquoise, there's like 1,200 instances in CSS where they're declaring the font family to control the font weight rather than the app just using font weight. And so that was kind of one of the things we had to address. But
Gotcha.
the big thing that I see is like a lot of people, the way they approach CSS is that they're looking at the feature that they're working on and they're scoping everything to that feature, right? They're saying, okay, this is the the show section, right? So we have show
Right.
title, show image, show this, show that, and it's like it's all encapsulated, right? There's like what I call the fetishization of encapsulation, like everything's got to be encapsulated, right?
Mm,
But if you just like use CSS the way it was designed, like the first C is cascading, right? Use that to your advantage and let things inherit. Then you're only changing things where they need to be changed, and so you can get away with writing a lot less CSS. And then when you're not scoping everything to this particular feature, it becomes a lot more flexible.
gotcha. So we got a couple questions coming in, and
Yeah.
one of them feels relevant because I think we just talked about it. So is there an argument for like a microscopic design system? So a design system for only this thing versus a giant design system for all the things?
That's a great question. At Groupon, there was a big question of like, can can we just have a system that supports all of our verticals, right? Internal tools, consumer, merchant, whatever else. And at the time, I was like, no way, because like internal tools has all these tables, and it's very like data driven, whereas the consumer side is very e-commerce driven. And the merchant side was also kind of data driven, but in a different way than our internal tools. So there's a lot of different components. But over time, I've started making things a lot more atomic, right?
Mm,
Where we're just taking like kind of the bare bones HTML elements and providing utility classes to compose those things in different ways, right? So it's not utility first, it's utility also, right? Like we have these component styles, like a button is one class, but then if you want to arrange two buttons, like there's a utility for that. You don't have to have, you know, uh, you know, buy button module or something. It doesn't have to
gotcha.
be that specific. We're just putting a flex on it. That's it.
Got it. So it's kind of leaning toward the what was it called? The OOCSS, the Nicole Sullivan, like sort of utility first, what eventually became Tailwind, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, but I think Tailwind kind of is overboard. Like you don't want a utility for everything, right?
Right.
Like I don't want to have to write 30 classes to make a button. And I know people are going to yell at me that there's ways in Tailwind to do that, whatever. But like if you look at their documentation page, they're like, oh, look at how easy it is to write Tailwind. But then you inspect that exact same thing. There's way more Tailwind under the hood to make that thing than what they're actually showing you on
Right.
the example. Because you're dealing with media queries and all this stuff, like it doesn't really handle that stuff very well. But like if you can just write CSS, you don't need to use other frameworks. You can just make your own.
Gotcha. All right. Another question that came in, I think in reference to sort of what we're looking at on the screen here. Um, what's the difference between a design system and an old-fashioned style guide?
Yeah, I think they're kind of used interchangeably. Um, the style guide was kind of like here's how we do things, right? And the design system can be more like tools, like here's all the tools that we use, and I think this kind of skews more like towards the engineers. Like the designers don't use the documentation very much, uh, except to just kind of make sure that the engineers have what they're designing with. That's a huge thing too. Is like you can have a design system in code, but if your designers don't have the equivalent UI kit and Figma that they're working from, you don't have a design system, right? Like
Got it.
they're going to be just making all these one-offs that you're then going to be having to constantly support in the system. And so it's very important to like, I talk to the designers twice a week and I see what they're working on, what to see kind of like what's not in the system that I might need to add to the system, or any concerns that they have with like how the engineers are implementing the system, like that where I have to like work with them individually on those things. So um, The style guide I think it was a lot more static, right? Where I think the design
Mm,
system kind of evolves over time. Um, and it includes more than just like kind of like what's in the system, but like how we do it and when to do certain things. Maybe the same thing in a style guide, but I don't know. It's kind of a semantic difference to me, I think.
okay. Okay. Well, let's pull this one down here, and then the last one that I have is the primary secondary color division is based on what?
It's completely arbitrary. I think primary is just like these are the most used colors associated with like our brand and just like kind of black and white. And then secondary is like more like accent colors. Like there's other pages in Jason's Figma that use those. It's not really used in the one that we'll be working on. But I just kind of pulled those in there just for, just to have them as an example. And then the neutral colors are just kind of, grays and stuff you would use for like borders and text and things like that.
Got it. And now you said earlier when we were talking about spacing, you said that there are a lot of hills you can die on, but there is a question that I think is worth maybe talking about a little bit. How do you choose a multiple when you're setting up a spacing?
I mean, I kind of just go by, multiples of four because generally screen sizes are multiples of four. And if you're doing, if your spacing is horizontal and your type is vertical and your type is using multiples of four, it just kind of like visually just kind of
Mm.
feels good. You can do it however you want though. Like, I'm not here to tell you like how to, to be prescriptive and how to do it, but this is more about like taking the way you do it and documenting it and making it repeatable.
And so in this case, you used the multiples of five because that was where I was in my Figma, and it
Yep.
was like closest to the design that I did.
Yep.
And so, were I being a responsible designer, I might have actually looked at what those spaces were.
Right. But like here's the thing, right? Like once we document all this stuff and we make design tokens of all these values, it makes it very easy to like we could just change this to multiples of four and all of our stuff would just update automatically.
Mm-hmm. 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 Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. Multiples of four meaning spacing is font size. Yeah, right. Like you kind of because that's the scale that I'm used to is that
Hmm.
you've got your 12-point font and then your 16-point font, and then it goes to 24, 36, 48, etc. So multiples of four, but also like increments of 12.
Yeah, so the spacing page that we're on, actually, if you scroll down a little bit, um, a lot of the kind of vocabulary that I use around spacing comes from this article by Nathan Curtis that I linked to there under terminology, and he talks a lot about like creating a scale, right? And you want the values to be far enough apart to create a hierarchy without because if you're just doing like if your font sizes are like, 12 pixels, 14, 16, 18, 20, like you're not really there's not much of a visual hierarchy there. But if you're doing like, 12, 16, 20, 24, 32, and then it just gets bigger and bigger, then it becomes more clear. But Nathan also has an interesting way of describing space. So like inset referring to like padding, like the inside of an element, and then uh, I'm drawing a blank now, but it's all in the documentation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it just makes it really easy to distinguish like margins from padding. Um, there we go, inset, and there's like different types of inset, and then stack. We're essentially just adding margin to like mostly to the bottom and to the right of things, um, instead of just like whatever, right? Um,
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. So then we get into typography and nice. You pulled all these in. That's great. Um,
yeah, so
is
here's a place where I would probably say like, maybe we would want our type scale to have a little bit more space between the values because we basically have like 12, 14, uh, 18, I think, or 16 and 18, and then it goes up all the way up to like 36. We would maybe want to like remove some of those middle values and space it out a little
mm,
bit more. But I mean, it's a design decision, right? So like, it's not, like I said, it's not a hill I'm going to die on, but
Well,
that
yeah,
would,
and
that'd be like a
and it actually
recommendation I
is
would
really
make.
interesting here when we get into this because like what I was struggling with on this is I tend to make everything too big. Like my default is to make all the text huge.
Yeah.
And so in this case, I was trying to mimic off of the way that this is Crunchyroll, Netflix, Paramount Plus. I think there's
Hmm.
Hulu, there's Apple TV. So I was kind of looking at the way that all of them did it, and
Hmm.
they all did a good job of like staying small.
Sure.
And then I was over here on mine trying to like make sure that it made sense. And I think I kept like bumping font sizes up and down a little bit to try to create some kind of hierarchy. But I think you're right that it's not like I think a designer would look at this and go, "You're 80% there."
Yeah. And again, that's fine. Like we can adjust it, right? Um, in our design tokens, and we can once we have this prototype built, we can see those changes in real time, and it's like we're designing in the browser, right? And we can
Mm,
see it responsively. Okay, maybe we made it too big. When we go to a small screen, it's like, maybe we look at some like fluid type styles, right? Where the size of the font is based on the viewport width, right?
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got it.
So,
Okay.
but here, like week one, we're just documenting what exists and narrowing it down, right? So there might have been some other font sizes that you used that I just kind of, it was like a one-off, right? I chalked it up as a one-off,
Sure.
and so this is like the scale that we're sticking with.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Yeah, and people are talking about even in the chat, like my friends is saying smaller, Linda's saying bigger. So yeah, I
I'm
can see
I'm
how
getting
that.
old, so like I always skew for bigger, bigger,
No,
bigger, bigger.
I just zoom in on every website these days.
That's true. Yeah, but a lot of them, like, they're not designed to like deal with that. Some of them are designed a very particular way that it
That's
doesn't really help. But
that's a fact.
and
Yeah.
that's if you can get through all of the popovers and the cookie disclaimers and all that stuff to even see a website these days.
I honestly on my phone I put most things into reader mode now because like
Nice.
it just doesn't work otherwise.
Yeah, so icons wise, like there aren't really a lot for now, but
Yeah,
that
I
could
don't have
change.
any.
We've got like 100 on turquoise in Pit Viper, and so it certainly adds up. But kind of the way we're approaching this is to use like an SVG sprite that we pull into every page that we can then kind of call instances of icons and then apply
Mm-hmm.
CSS to them to change the size, the color, and everything. And then if we need to, change an icon or add, remove an icon, we can do that just in the sprite file, and it updates everywhere on the site. It's not, we don't have these like individual SVGs embedded in the page that we have to do like a find and replace on or anything like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, good question about clamp.
Hmm.
So clamp, I think, is one of those things that when I first saw it, I was like, I'm gonna use this everywhere. And then I really struggled because the syntax of it doesn't fit inside my brain. Something about like the minimum maximum. I'm like, okay, I'm in, and
Hmm.
then the middle one, I'm like, why doesn't this work? Why is this
Yeah,
always wrong?
it's frustrating. There's generators like I think Utopia.fyi is one. Um, But I think it's great for headlines. I don't know about like for body text as much.
Mm,
I think maybe you could just use a media query that bumps down the stuff a notch. But yeah, I think it's great. I wouldn't write it by hand because yeah, it doesn't make sense to me either, and I do this for a living, so it's like there's so much stuff I don't know about CSS. I mean, it's funny that we're doing this today because CSS Day is going on in Amsterdam, and like all the heavy
all right,
hitters in
right.
CSS are there. Yuna's there, Adam's there, Stephanie's there, Kevin Powell's there. Like anybody you've ever heard of that does CSS is like in Amsterdam. Except for me, I'm here because I'd rather be here with you, Jason, than be enjoying Amsterdam. No,
Means a lot to me.
it's hard to get
Um,
away when you have two kids, so I
I
understand that.
yeah, and I didn't even get invited. So, okay. So then we get into our design tokens, and so Design tokens, I assume, are the pieces that sort of they're built out of these. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So we're basically just documenting all of the values that we use in the system, right? And the way I approach it is like I have it in these 3 layers that give us varying degrees of control over how those values are used in our system, right? So the global tokens are just all the values in the system, like the raw hex values or font sizes, everything. And then the contextual values are like how we use those values, right? So maybe we have a particular brand color. Maybe, for subdued text, we use a certain color, right? And then so if we want to change, let's say our brand color, we can do that in these contextual tokens, and it only affects where the brand color is used. It's not going to like change other parts that we didn't intend.
Right. Yeah, and this, so I'm happy to see the way this is constructed because I think over the years I've picked up tips from, I think the first time I heard somebody speak on how to organize CSS was Jonathan Snook when he was
Yep.
when he was teaching Smacks.
Yep.
And watch people like Nicole Sullivan, people like Rachel. Oh no, she's been
Rachel
on the
Andrew.
show. Rachel Andrew,
She's great.
Chris Coyer, so on and so forth,
Yep.
talking about different strategies for organizing CSS. And I think now I instinctively write sort of good CSS like this. Like I tend to do the absolute values and then these contextual values because I've been bitten by this so much where
Sure.
I have a gray that I like for text, but then you start using it for borders and you want to
Right.
change it. And then you find like, oh, now I can't even copy. I can't
That's
even
right.
like find and replace anymore. I got to go line by line on this. And it's like,
Yeah,
okay, I need to make
I
this
see a
better.
lot of systems that only have that top layer of tokens, and then when they have to change something, it becomes this big find and replace job, right? So whereas this, if the page that we're working on doesn't have any borders really, so we don't have a token for borders, but if we did, we'd have like a second, we'd have another thing that's for borders, and maybe we have different borders, right? So we have the context of, maybe we have a brand border versus like a regular border, right? Or we have a
Mm-hmm.
success and an error border, right? And so we can
Mm-hmm.
define all that in our tokens. And then
Yeah.
finally, the component tokens, we can get down to the nitty gritty and have like all of our individual component styles in, defined in tokens, right? So that if we want to change like just what a button looks like, we can do that in those styles without touching any CSS, without touching any markup. We can control the visual styles just in that. And we'll talk later about like theming, like let's say we want to support different brands or different verticals that have different global values. We can do
Right.
that really easily with the tokens.
So yeah, this is one local color. I struggle with this too because I over abstract this all the time. And then what I find is that I maybe the same problem that I have when I try to look at Tailwind, I create for myself by having these like many layered contextual and component and then subcomponent and so on and so forth where my tokens become their own little, like I've made my own framework for CSS basically.
Yeah.
And managing that can get really out of control. So how do you draw the line for yourself where like between, I guess, when is it time to do component tokens versus having, we know that buttons use, color text button, for
Yeah.
example, versus having like a straight up button dash suite of custom properties.
Sure. So I think I with component tokens, I only use them when I need them, right? So an example would be uh, at Turquoise, we wanted to make kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like the white label, versions
Oh yeah,
of
like the
our stuff.
generics.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where companies could provide essentially their own global tokens, and
Right.
then those would filter down to the contextual tokens and the component tokens. And so if I need the button color to be different, or if they need a different border radius on a button, we can have those component tokens. But I'm not like sweating like every single component in the system has to have these unless it needs to be changed.
Got it. So you're choosing some particularly high volume components.
Yep.
And like if it's going to get hit hard, if it's going to have a ton of variations, then it makes sense to do this component specific theming.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's something that isn't, it's not going to change a ton. Like the header for the website probably isn't going to be like ultra customized unless you're white labeling your design system. So
Yeah, and
for the
the
average
header's
company,
probably more. So one of the hardest things I think about design systems is like, where does the system end and the product begin, right? Like you don't want to be
ooh,
in charge of, you don't want the system to be responsible for product decisions, right? So what is the header composed of? What components are in it? What does it do when you click on stuff? Like you don't want any of that in the system. You want
mm-hmm.
the header to be composable from all the parts of the system, but you don't want, if you want the nav to have 3 items instead of 5 items or whatever, like that's up to you. We'll support that, but like that's a product decision, right?
Right.
So I think that's the thing that a lot of people get hung on, that they want to put all of this stuff in the system, and maybe in the UI kit you want that stuff, right? Like it just like I look at a UI kit as like a component library for developers, right? There's really like there's the UI kit, there's what we're doing here, right? The CSS, and then there maybe the engineers take what we're doing here and build components from that. And maybe they build them in Angular, they build them in Vue, they build them in React, whatever. But I'm just like providing the tools that they need to make that easier, right? Taking one thing out of the equation so that they can just focus on like how it works rather than what it looks like.
I gotcha. Yeah, so I think that's a good point because there's a difference between a design system, which is intended to be, reused and applied across multiple parts of the product, and like the design of the product itself. Like the header is not a reusable component. It's just the thing at the top of the website for the product.
It could be
And
a reusable component, right? Like it could be a component that lives in our, in our front end, what language of choice. But it's composed of, these CSS classes, right? That maybe that gets shifted around,
right.
but we're not documenting that in the system. That's just like more of an implementation of it.
Yeah. And so I guess the thing that is important is that as you're deciding what goes into the design system and so on and so forth, you have to take the context of what you're building into account. And like, is this really something that like lots of developers are going to need to be able to implement quickly? Or is this like, once this is implemented, it doesn't really change without a huge cross-functional decision that
Right.
goes up to like every VP in the company about what goes into the top nav, what goes into the, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
there are
I'm not
parts
in
of the
those
site that
meetings.
exactly, right. And I think and that's the thing to note is like, you don't really, when you're doing the design system, you're not making those like business critical product decisions about like what the information architecture of the product is, or
Right.
those sorts of things. So don't try to build them into the design system, or you're going to put yourself at odds
Right.
with people in the company. You got to choose your scope of control and kind
Yep.
of be okay with that.
My
Okay.
approach is I'm essentially making a third party, framework, but I work at the company, right? So this system is a dependency in the product, but I don't even have, I've been there a year and a half. I don't have the app loaded on my computer. Like I don't commit to the app. I commit to a separate repo that they're using as a dependency, right?
Right. And remembering which parts you're expected to control versus which parts they're expected to control.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing that I've noticed is that teams that have design systems or security teams or like anybody who's sort of like an adjacent team that controls a piece of the product for compliance or consistency or any other sort of cross-cutting concern. If there is a clear understanding of like who controls what and for what reason, and everybody agrees on the value of those things, it goes so well. If there is a struggle for control, where the security team is trying to like control things that are outside of the realm of security because they have opinions or whatever it may be, or the product team is resisting things that the security team needs to control because they don't want to,
Mhm.
those sorts of things, then now you've got these internal power struggles and it gets very political, it gets very draining, and the teams can really struggle to get anything done despite having all of the outward appearances of a highly agile team because
Right.
they've broken down these functions.
Mhm.
So again, the communication of things, the trust on the team, all that stuff is so much more important because honestly, we could be really bad at design systems and really good at trusting each other, and we could probably outperform a team that didn't trust each other and had great design systems.
Sure.
So that's another little tangent. We're full of tangents today, Mike.
Yeah,
I'm full of
I could talk
tangents
about
today.
this all day.
So let's talk a little bit. Like we've got a couple other sections to explore here. So we've got components, and so these, I'm happy to see. We've got the kind of general setup here of how these things work. I love that it's just straight HTML, and I'm assuming this is just copy pastable for me, right? Like I can pull
Yep.
this out, swap in whatever person's photo,
Yep.
and we're good to go.
Yep. And then, like the turquoise one, we have an avatar, but if there's no image, it'll fall back to like initials, right? So you could put the person's initials in
Oh
there.
yeah.
Like there's a, and you could there's a thing where we have like stacked avatars, right? Where they're kind of like overlapping, and there's all these different things. But yeah, the docs are crucial because like we want to show developers not just what's in the system, but like how to use it, right?
So we've got buttons, we've got nav bars. Oh, you built out my nav bar. I was literally like, this has been on my to-do list. So excellent. My life just got so much easier. But so we end up with these nice little pieces here. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
We've got different typography. Oh yeah, look at it go. Amazing. So this is excellent.
Yeah, so this is essentially everything we need to build that page, right? All the these are all like the kind of the raw components, and then the utility classes allow us to like arrange those components in the way that we need to, as well as the layout. So this is very similar to Andy Bell's Cube CSS, right? Where we kind of divide things up into like components, utilities, and layouts. I call it cool CSS. But yeah, like that's really for me. That's like all you really need, and I don't find myself writing CSS ever, and the devs certainly don't have to write. And if they are writing CSS, like then we have a problem. Like they need to come see me. Like I'm basically a code owner on the CSS file in the app, and so if people are adding to that, I get like added as a reviewer on the pull request. So that kind of helps us keep that stuff in check.
Awesome. Okay, and so I like some of the naming that's happening in here too, where we've got text is text. That's fine. But like surface, this is something I've always struggled with because I call it background, but it's not background. It's like it's something else. It's the color of the container, which isn't always the background. And so I like surface is very good. And then we've got some layout stuff, which I'm very happy to see.
And you'll notice all this stuff is a lot more verbose than like Tailwind. So developers like this because like they actually can tell at a glance like what's happening without like, oh, what is MX8? I'm sure if you use Tailwind a lot, you probably know what that is. But like even our designers like know what's going on here. So here's something that I want to point out is like how we're using custom properties here. So like you could just go nuts and make a bunch of CSS classes that handle every single combination of flex properties. But for the most part, you're just flexing, right? You're applying display flex, you're centering the items, you're adding a certain amount of gap, and maybe you're justifying it, but maybe not. And then maybe it should wrap or maybe it shouldn't, right? So we have these kind of sensible defaults that work in most, 80% of cases. And then we provide certain custom properties that you can override in a style attribute, right? So you could just write, the actual CSS in there, but through this method, like we're saying, these are the ones you should change, right? That you're allowed to change, right? Rather than just writing a bunch of inline CSS, like here you can, change the justification, right? So that it's to the right in this particular context. But in most cases, like the defaults will get you there.
Yeah. This is great. So then we've got a grid, right?
Yep.
And that'll be very useful. Got our default spacing so that things are, split the right way.
Yeah, Flow is another Andy Bell original that I stole. Basically, it's a container, and all the children of that container get the same amount of bottom margin instead of applying that margin to every individual child. But then you can also add margin, with one of the other utilities to a child element if it needs to be different.
Got it. Cool. Then we've got, let's see, our padding, our insets. So that gives us our, like, so it's not crammed against the side.
Hmm.
Okay. Visual stuff. So we can center.
The best thing in CSS is centering stuff, right? The hardest
Mm-hmm.
the hardest thing.
I've been blown away, honestly, at like how far we've come on that. Like, I think it's a one-liner these days. You can just like place, what is it, place content center?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different ways you can do it. And this is like not being prescriptive about like how to write CSS. It's more about like, what to include and uh, how to organize it. So the goal is like developers don't have to write CSS. And so whatever helps us get there, like you can write the CSS however you want. So, my way of centering this thing might be different from somebody else's. Like this is just putting margin auto on the thing. It's, we could also use
Right.
grid. There's any number of ways we could achieve that, but we're just like, okay, here's how we're doing it in our system, and we're documenting that.
Nice. Then we got layouts. Oh, nice.
Yeah, so this is like, all of our stuff lives in containers, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
HTML is just boxes essentially. And so the layouts help us, particularly CSS Grid, help us arrange all of these boxes. And then those boxes, depending on the sizes, like kind of inform how all of the stuff sits in those boxes, right? And we can like further use like Flexbox and Grid we can nest these layouts, right? If we get like more complex layouts, we can potentially nest these layouts. So I use like a data attribute called data grid area to like define what those are separate from like the semantics of it. Because maybe the grid area is called nav, but in a certain context, maybe it doesn't need to be like a nav, a
It doesn't
nav
need to be a nav
element,
element, right?
right? Particularly if you're nesting things, maybe the main section isn't a main element, right? But in the context of this layout, it's kind of the main area.
Yeah, that's super slick. And then we got some, oh, all right then. So we get some theming
So,
right out of the
so,
gate. That's
so yeah,
great.
this is a fun thing. So if you scroll down a bit, these are the values we're using in the theme. If you take a style element and you put a style attribute on it and put display block, it will show you the contents of that. And then further, if you add the attribute content editable, you can actually click in that box and edit those values live, and it will update.
Oh, very cool. Okay, so hey, look at that. So now we can start theming
Yeah,
right away.
yeah.
That's very cool.
That's literally the only context in which you'd ever do that is like
Right.
demonstrating theming. I couldn't think of another one, but so we can scope that to like the root to affect the whole page, or we can scope it to a class to affect like a subset of things. So that becomes super valuable. So we're not really using that in this first project, but it was just something that I wanted to demonstrate that you could do with these tokens.
Right. This is very cool. And then
And if
we've
you
got,
if you blow if you go back to that page and blow it out, just like erase the whole thing, it will default uh, to the regular styles.
oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah. So if you scroll up to the top, you'll see like the kind of how we're doing that. So we're using like the fallback in the var, right? To define like here's what the name of the property is, and if that doesn't exist, we'll fall back to I'm using Sass for our tokens because like the developers we don't need everything to be a custom property to let the developers use. We want to kind of bake that into the system
Okay.
so that like we have like a surface brand, right? We don't want people just saying like, oh, background color, since they're not writing CSS, they don't have to write background color, you know color yellow or something. Like, don't do that. That's not in the system. Please don't do that. We only want certain colors to be used for surfaces, for example.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I
So
can see that.
this kind of lets us like define which of those tokens are themable.
Got it. Got it. Got it. Okay. And then over here, I saw a prototype button, which I clicked to.
Yeah, and that's
And
the whole page built using the system.
uh, I could hug you.
And so like this,
Um,
I did this in less than a week. So like, so here's how the week would go, right? Day one, I'm meeting with stakeholders, meeting all the, product people, all of the developers, all the designers that I'm going to be working closely with, and I'm kind of just getting a sense of like, what's your experience with design systems? What are your expectations for this? How can I help you, right? Like I look at my role as, developers, designers, and product people are my customers. Like the company's customers are not my customers. Like that's your problem, right?
mm-hmm.
I'm here to help you. I'm here to make your job easier. So however I can do that with the design system is like kind of informs, how I build the system. And maybe that's different from company to company. So certainly a lot of the stuff that I've built into Pit Viper is in this system for LWJ, but this is specific to what LWJ needs, right? Like I'm not
Right.
copying, Turquoise's, font, uh, spacing values or font values or anything like that. This is like bespoke for LWJ, but it uses all the same concepts. So day one is like meeting with stakeholders. Day two is the visual style audit, right? Where we're finding out what those values are. And then we're putting that into design tokens. We're like looking at the roadmap. What's the next feature we're working on? And then what are the things that we need to build using those tokens? And then what are all the the components, the utilities, and the layouts that we need to support that stuff?
Yeah.
And then we're prototyping. So once this is kind of how I'll work is there's actually on the homepage of the this design system doc that we built. There's a link to CodePen that actually has a template that's using lwj.css. So you can just start using all the stuff in the documentation in CodePen. So we could essentially replicate that page here in CodePen. And so the way I'll work is I will use this template for like the next feature, right? And maybe there's
Mm-hmm.
CSS that I need to write to support that new feature. I'll start building that out, and then I'll write whatever CSS I need in the CSS tab, and then I will show that to stakeholders, like, hey, how does this look? Is this what you intended, for the designers? And then once we do that, I will take the CSS, put that in the system, release a new version, and then from there, the template is using the latest version of the framework, so I can delete all of the CSS and it should still work, right? And then from there, we're taking
Got
that,
it.
handing that off to the developers, and then they have all of the markup and everything that they need to build this entire page. And they can just say, okay, I just need this one episode thing, markup for one episode. I can write all the JavaScript I need to pull that from the API and show, all of the different things for each episode in whatever data we're getting back. And they can get this stuff built out way quicker than if they had to like style this on their own.
Right. And so I can do something like I kind of want to try this now that we've
Yeah.
got a playground. So for me to put this together, so now I've got each of these pieces and we can kind
Mm-hmm.
of see the triple dots showing up wherever we want them to go.
Yeah.
And
So I
then
I actually did this, but for whatever reason, the image that I passed in wasn't working. So I'll probably have to think of something to get around that. But I can
I
send you
just want
this
to
link
try
here.
I just want to see how well this works. So we go into the nav and we drop in this nav. And then yeah, so my
We're just missing some image
this
references,
this
but yeah,
image is broken and that's fine.
yeah.
Um, but like it starts coming together real fast, which is pretty impressive considering I'm just kind of hopping through the docs and grabbing the things that I need. So let's see if
Hmm.
we can quickly. I want to lay out the. We would want a grid, And so I would grab a grid like this. Nope, don't get all of those, just that bit there. And then close that up. And then if I want to get one of these for the videos themselves, it's probably somewhere in, nope, where would it be? It's probably not in here, right? Because
You have to compose it. It's not there's not like a card. I will put a card in if like the card itself needs like a hover state or, you know, styles like that. But each of those things is just composed of like an image with some, you know, some inside of one of those grid elements. So like in this case, you'd probably want like a figure. Okay, each card is a figure, and then you've got the image, and then the fig caption is all the text below it. That's kind of how I wrote it in my prototype.
Okay. So let's do a figure. And then we've got our figure. And then underneath that, we've got our fig caption. And our fig caption has some stuff in it. And we'll be able to style that with our text stuff. So I'm going to start by saying it's probably like an H2 or something. We'll put a class on that later. And then we need our icon. And so our icon is in here somewhere.
Yeah, so you can use the I think if you expand the not well that go up one example, yeah, right there. You can basically just copy that in. But the problem is in CodePen we also have to pull in that
right,
sprite.
we need the sprite.
Yeah, which we can do.
Okay, well, and we can probably. Why don't we skip that for now?
Sure.
And we'll
just worry about the title.
Yeah, because I want to be mindful of how much of a rabbit hole I get into here. And so this would be the episode description.
Yeah, this is a great approach. Is like just get the markup right, and then we'll figure out what classes we need to make it look like the picture.
Okay. So then down here, I have, is that not how this works?
It might be below that section.
Oh no, place kitten is down. Well, that's too bad. Why don't we instead then I have somewhere in my, you know what I have? I have a Cloudinary site images. I'm working on a thing.
If you want, I sent you a link in the StreamYard chat to like the actual CodePen that
I got you.
Minus the hero image, which I couldn't figure out why that wasn't loading, but
got it.
So there's the sprite, right? That's all the icons, and then yeah, you can just kind of see like how we compose that.
Cool. Okay, so we've got all this bit here, and so we've got our nav happening. We've got all these pieces. Our image didn't work for whatever reason. That's fine. And then we've got, here's the promo section. That's this one here. So we've got this little tag. We've got the heading, text body here. We've got a button. Great. And then this would be like when you click this, we would fire the JavaScript to start the video player. Or I guess actually in this case, it would be a regular link because it's going to link into the episode standalone page.
Yep. And that class would work on an anchor element as well as a button.
Episode link. And it refactored that for me. That was cool. Good job, CodePen. So then,
so there's an issue where like we would see, we don't want that to be purple, right? So we would in our button styles we would update that to inherit the color of the parent as well as remove the text underline.
Got it. Yeah. So then we've got our, this, what was it called? It was like a eyebrow, I think you called it.
Yep. The kind of the all caps text I refer to
Oh,
those
so not
as
that one. So this
eyebrows.
one's just small text.
Yeah, the
And then we've
presented by
got,
is it's small text and then like subdued, meaning like the color is not as vibrant as the regular text.
nice,
And
nice.
your design's interesting because like the headers are actually like an even brighter color than the body text, and then there's subdued text, which is like another level. So like you can
Mm,
create hierarchy with like position, right? Like how far are things apart by size, by color, by weight, right? Font weight.
mm-hmm.
So there's lots of different ways you can create hierarchy besides just like font size.
Yeah, this was actually something that I was trying to embrace for this design was the idea of using something other than size because I always rely on size.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was trying to point out, like this is the most important thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you've got your title or your image and your title, and then you've got body text, but then here you've got something that's not as bright, but
Right.
that's a little bolder. And then here
Mm-hmm.
you've got something that's not as bright and is also not bold. So that you hopefully when you look at this, you see the image and then you see this and then you read this and kind of come back around to read these.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of iFlow, that's assuming I know anything about design. So
I've been in my career, I've been the best designer on the engineering team and the best engineer on the design team, and neither of those things is saying very much. So like I'm not a designer and I'm not an engineer really.
I'm using Arc browser. It's dope. You should try it. The what's up, Fuzzy? How you doing? And let's see.
I forgot to change my hat, Jason.
Oh, did you have a different hat? I've got that hat
Shout out to
back there.
Cassie Evans
What's up, Cassie? And
and
Brody.
Brody. Can't forget Brody.
Oh, good. Yes, that is an excellent hat. I
It's the best.
unfortunately can't wear that hat because my head is too big.
I can relate.
Okay, but I mean, this is great, and I can see, I see the benefit here. I see what's happening, where we sort of get to the point where, as we're building out more things in the site, we're kind of just copy pasting units of UI,
Yep.
and it makes it so that I don't have to stress about the specifics of what's going on here. I just get to
Mm-hmm.
work on the thing that I'm
Yeah.
supposed to get done and get shipped,
Yeah.
and it all just kind of works.
Yeah, and in this prototyping process, like we saw with the button, it surfaces stuff like kind of stuff we didn't consider when we were first making it, and also like as we're using these things in different contexts when we build new features, that also surfaces stuff, or like maybe we have to adjust our layout, or maybe we need a whole new layout to support this page, right? Instead of trying
Mm.
to, or like maybe we notice a thing like with the nav when I was first designing the nav. I was using a bunch of utility classes to make it, which you can do, and that's fine. But like if you find yourself doing that a lot, maybe this needs to be a component, right? And so we just bake that in, so then you only need one class instead of 5 classes, right?
Right. Yeah. And so then, so there's a question from, where is he? Fuzzy asked, any advice for folks starting out to build their own design system? And I think that's probably a good, we've got about 15 minutes left.
Mm-hmm.
So you were able to get so much done here. And, you said it took you about a week, which, first of all, thank you for putting a week into this. This is
I mean,
incredible.
a week, like chronologically, not a week of work. It
Sure,
was,
I get you. I get you. So being able to put this together in the short time that you put this together in, it's got a lot going on, and it's, it feels usable, and it feels
yeah,
like the sort of thing that, me as an outsider, I can go in and do. So obviously you've got a ton of experience. This is your full-time job. This is the thing that you think about all day, every day. So for somebody who is newer to this, what are the things that we should be thinking about or studying or looking into so that we can get toward making these types of design systems?
Yeah, I mean, I think just looking, like we said, looking at the next thing on the roadmap and just start your system from there, right? Whatever you need to build to support that, that's the system, right? And then it just grows over time, and incorporating it into your workflow instead of trying to sell the higher ups on like, oh, we need a design system. Don't even say design system. Just make it the way you do it, and they will see the results, right? You're selling the results. You're not selling the system. You're selling like, look how much faster we're moving because we're doing it in this way, right? Like we're able to go from, it taking 3 weeks because the developers are struggling with the CSS to like now they can ship it in a week, right?
Yeah.
And then each successive feature gets faster because you're writing less and less CSS. It sells itself, right?
Yeah.
In terms of like, how do you learn this stuff? Like there's a ton of great design systems folks out there, Dan Mall, Gina Yan. You've had Dan on the show, I remember. Brad Frost. There's just a ton of people that I've certainly learned from. Nathan Curtis has a lot of great stuff. But yeah, there's just a lot of people that enjoy the work and enjoy doing this stuff, and you can learn all this stuff pretty much for free. There's people talking about it all the time. Actually, inspired by your show, I was doing a show for a while called Design System Office Hours, CSS Office Hours, or something like that.
Nice.
Just office hours, I don't know. But I was just talking about CSS and design systems every Friday, and just making design systems out of whatever, right? You can practice on, go on Dribble and just like, hey, I'm going to make this thing, and build a design system for it or whatever. Or even on your own, personal site. Personal sites are kind of making a comeback. You can.
Is this the one?
No, that's something else. I think after I came up with that, everybody started using the term office hours.
Well, if you find a link, throw it out there.
I don't really. It was just kind of like a live thing. I didn't really record it or anything. It was just kind of.
And you named one more person. You said Dan Mall, Gina, Brad Frost, and then you said
Nathan Curtis, who I had referenced some of his stuff. There's a lot of great books got behind me here. We got let's see. Got this design systems book by Alla Komotova. It's a great book. We've got this is Brad's Atomic Design. It's another good one. Got Dan just came out with a book called Design That Scales. It's another good one. What else? The folks at Envision have this book called Design Systems Handbook.
Nice.
A lot of good books out there, but a lot of the stuff you can just get by following people. They talk about it all the time. They won't shut up about it. It's like, how do you know a design systems practitioner? They'll tell you.
I'm also spotting that you have the ultimate coding companion behind you there on the shelf.
This guy.
This little buddy here.
Yeah.
Maybe one of these. We could all. Yeah.
These are available for purchase, everyone.
These are.
Do you want to put the link in the chat?
I will put the link in the chat. What an excellent idea. Yeah, we've got corgi ducks, everyone. They are amazing.
Sell a lot of these to cover my invoice.
Yes. So please go buy them because there are so many, and
they're great. They're fun. You've got a whole garage full of these, don't you?
I definitely still have like 700 left. So please buy a corgi duck.
Yeah, they're great.
Please.
My kids love them.
They float. They're good to talk to. They're great listeners. They will make you. They help you with your code if you explain your code to it. Excellent companions to have. So, Mike, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for taking the time to teach us today.
Of course.
Is there? Let's see. So I'm going to share your website one more time. Is there anywhere else that you would, a veritable platoon of rainbow corgis, indeed, a horde, in fact, Super cute, never talks back. That is also true. So this is your website. Anywhere else that we should be sending people to either find out more about you or more about design systems?
No, it's pretty much all on my site. If you want to check out Turquoise's design system, it's pitviper, all one word, .turquoise.health, and that'll look very familiar to you because it's the same kind of like layout as the one that we've built for LWJ. I'm trying to make a GitHub template that will make setting this up a lot easier if folks want to like take that for a spin eventually. I'll probably
Nice.
promote that on Mastodon when I get around to it. But yeah, it's a similar thing. A lot of the, same structure and layout and everything. We're just using different design tokens essentially.
Yeah. I mean, it's very cool stuff, and you can kind of see the flexibility here just in looking at this as a like a reusable system. That once you've kind of thought through how these things work, they start to organize into buckets in your mind, and this is the value of doing this work is when you start to think about things in certain buckets and you start to understand how these different components interact with each other, how these different elements and tokens interact with each other. You're able to start thinking about your websites as Lego pieces where you're snapping together things that are already done for you. And it turns things from being, it's not two jobs anymore. You don't have to like make the layout and also make the components that make the layout. You get to look at something you're supposed to do and say, all right, what's in the box that lets me get there? And suddenly things go much faster. And so I think that really is a huge selling point for why this stuff is worth it. And even if it can sometimes make you feel like you're using a coloring book instead of going from scratch, which the artist in me always bucks at the idea of having to use something that's been pre-designed.
Yeah,
But also, like, the artist in me has been meaning to ship a portfolio redesign for 5 years now. So maybe
that's
the
a
artist in
big.
me needs to sit down and shut up and use some pre-designed components.
Well, I would say two things. I love Adam Argyle's open props. Those are great if like you
So
don't have a
good.
designer. Those are what I call like curated design tokens, right? Like Adam's already picked out all the great values for you, and you can incorporate that into however you want to use CSS, right? So if you want a nice type scale, Adam's already taken care of it for you. If you want like some nice gradients, his gradients are amazing. He's
Yes.
got those there for you. Yeah, shout out to Adam. He's awesome. But also like it's hard to, I would say that these systems don't necessarily have to be a constraint, right? Like this system can support new stuff, right? We just have to build around it. And we get designers, new designers at Turquoise who, they've got their own ideas about how stuff looks. So we look at those things and it's like either we can adjust the existing component to match what they want to do. We can create a variation of a component to support what they want to do, or we can make an entirely new thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's never like preventing you from doing what you want to do. It's just kind of I refer to it as like curating what we're doing, right? How we're doing things. We're not being prescriptive about how you do it. We're just kind of like documenting how we do it here at our particular company. And maybe that's different
Absolutely.
from company to company. But like at the end of the day, we're just applying the same visual styles to the same, few dozen elements over and over again until we die.
Right. Yeah, exactly that. That feels like as good a place as any to end it here. So,
One more thing I
yo,
want to pitch
oh,
is dogsof.dev. If you make websites and you have a dog, I'd love for you to send me a picture of your dog so that I can put on here. There's a lot of
oh, this is a very good website. Wow,
yep.
this is a great website. Why have I not heard of this website before? Everybody go look at this website.
There's some big name folks on here that have submitted their dogs. You see Lynn Fisher's dog is on there, and got like Brad Frost and
I love that
Kevin
Lynn
Powell. And
Fisher. I don't know if Lynn is still here. She stopped by earlier, but
he's the best.
I love that Lynn named her dog Gravy. Like, what
Yes.
a fantastic name for
Lynn
a
is
dog.
amazing because she's the only person that has submitted a dog that actually did it as a pull request instead of just filling out the form like a a person that doesn't have any time on their hands. Lynn, you're
Uh,
awesome. I
this
think
is
you're the best.
fantastic. I mean,
Yeah.
these are some good.
Even
That's a
if you
good
don't have a
dog.
dog,
Look
if
at
you
that
just like
dog.
looking at dogs, like, and some of the names are amazing. There's one
Yes.
that's like Burt Macklin, FBI agent, is one of the dogs. It's
Wait, Burt Macklin FBI. That
Parks
is
and
that.
Rec.
Whose dog is that though? I know that dog.
Oh, do you? Yeah. There's a lot of people that you would names you would
There's
recognize in here.
Dan Mall's dog. That's a cute dog.
Yeah, he's got two.
How much time we got? Because I'm gonna hang out in here all day.
Great. He is
Priscilla,
dogs.
Queen of
Yeah,
the
she has the
Desert.
best dog name.
This is fantastic. This is so good. This is wonderful. And I will be cribbing many of names. Ben Hur, good gravy. Uh, yeah, this is fantastic. And I'm going to look at this for the rest of the day. You should too. Thank you all very much for hanging out. Mike, thank you so much for spending some time today.
Yeah, no worries.
Any parting words for the chat as we are wrapping up?
Yeah, just how I like to say, whatever way you want to do things, it's your website, right? So if using the way you've been doing it works for you, just keep doing that. That's fine. If any of this has helped you, just like work that into the way you do things. And, it's your website.
Yeah, there are no rules. There are only pro tips.
Yeah,
Shared
exactly.
experience, shared pain, shared trauma, and we all try
Right.
to build something that looks nice. Mike, thank you so much. I
Of
really
course.
appreciate you taking the time. Chat, as always, thank you for hanging out with us. And make sure, wait, I got one more thing to show. One more thing that we got to look at. This episode, like every episode, has been live captioned. We've had Amanda here from White Coat Captioning, and that's made possible through the support of our sponsors. We've got Netlify on board today, making the show more accessible to more people. And make sure while you're clicking on things on the website, you go and check out the schedule. June is going to be a wild month for me for travel. I am at all sorts of events, some that I've announced, some that are surprises. And as a result, I won't be doing any more episodes for the remainder of June. And then the first Thursday in July is a US holiday. So I will be back on July 11th with the next episode of Learn with Jason. However, in the meantime, there are going to be a lot of fun things coming out. There is more stuff that I've been working on, like my 4 Web Dev series, more episodes of Web Lunch, and a couple more surprises along the way. So enjoy your summer, and I'll see you soon. Mike, thanks again. We'll see you all next time.
Thanks, Jason.